How we doing, Harvey? All right?
Yeah, good morning. How are you?
Okay. This one from risk. All right. I assume Ted may be coming in. I'm gonna close the door and we'll get started on the names. And then I'm hoping that as of Friday, we go back to normal schedule and the other minion can meet in the main show afterwards, that we'll be back in, we will go back into the base midrash for the daf. Learning sponsors. All right, I think Steve is on, right?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Year of Learning, Suanani Geralik, in memory of Malka Man and Philip Man. Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Beryl ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Yosef Meir ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Henya Rivka Pearl Rosner bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch. In memory of family murdered in the Holocaust, Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Marsha Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel Pinchas ben Harav Shimon, Sharon and Fred Liska, their family and many friends. In memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edel Bas Yaakov, Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Siddell and Irving and Pearl Kaplan. Friends of Avi Gitler, Avrameir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler, China Bad Yeshaya. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Toby Paris, Saratova Bad Yisrael Dov in her memory. Friends of Malka Levy, Malka Bad Yosef. Friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef Ben Chaim, Charlie Galfenstein, and Sam Levine, in memory of Ramona Levine, Rachel Mata Bad Ashi. I have a month of learning by Lynn Rappaport, in memory of her husband, Avram Ben Sion HaKohen. A week of learning by Michael and Sharon Glass, in memory of his We have a day of learning by Alvin Ribiet, in memory of his father, Yosef Ben Yaakov. May the Shemas have an aliyah, crank or a field, without the Yeshua Shema Tzliah, and the whole B'nai Yisrael, good bench. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so let's just a quick review as we move into today's daf. Okay, if I hold up and I rub two fingers like this, that was one method that said to crumble the kernels, right? If I had another approach was taking two fingers and rubbing it with the thumb, okay? Another approach hand and rub it, right? And crush the kernels, right? So there were different explanations that were presented at the bottom of Yud Gimel, how one could go about doing that, right? And then the Gemara on the bottom there says, Ketzad Menafeach, how did one Menafech, we said was blow, but what it meant was sifting, right? Amar Rav Adabar Ava, Rav Menafech Etzba'otav Ulamav. That had it Menafech biyado echat ubechol kocho. And Rabbi, we finished up with Rabbi Elazar saying one could sift it with the entire hand, but using almost like making a fist, holding it in a fist. Okay, and that's where we stopped yesterday to start the new Mishnah today. Okay, now, as we go with the new Mishnah, I just want to point out, remember we've said that preparation of Ochel Nefesh, of foodstuffs, is acceptable on Yom Tov. Okay? So how do you define that spices may be pounded using a pestle made out of wood? Why is that important? Because they all had pestles made out of stone. Okay. V'hamelach b'pach u'ba'etz haparud, or haparur. Okay, and as far as salt goes, there you needed to use a pestle that you are having, you're doing it through some sort of shinui.
And the difference between eights and Evan?
Eights would be wood, let's say a wooden bowl or a wooden pestle, as opposed to one made from stone.
And the difference would be?
I would assume that the one from stone was a better utensil, and you could grind the item finer. What happens if the Gemara asks your question, Marvin, or it just simply, clarifies it in another way? Gemara says, "Tekuli alma mihat melech bai shenui." Everybody seems to be in agreement that for pounding salt on Yom Tov, right, there needs to be some sort of change. By the way, the use of the earlier in the Mishnah, when it said salt to be by a be'etz haparur, some want to say, we're going to see that means a different utensil, not a pot handle, but almost like a flask. Right? But it's clear, says the Gemara, that everyone says with salt, it has to be a difference. My Tama, what's the reason? Rav Huna v'Rav Chisda. The two of them are going to give different explanations. We're going to see whether it's a machloket here, or they just give different views. Chad Amar says one, Kol HaKaderot Kulan Tzrichot Melech, that most cooked pots, most cooked foods require salt. Ve'ein Kol HaKaderot Tzrichot Tavlin, but not all cooked foods, right, require spices. So that's one explanation. Okay? So since there's more need of salt, okay, in cooking, that's why all the more so that everybody agrees that it needs a shinu. V'chadamar kol hatavlin mefigin ta'aman. And the others, one says all of the spices tend to lose their taste. Okay? Umelach einam mefigat ta'ama. But salt never loses its taste in what it does to the food. My benaihu, what's the difference in their explanations? Ika benaihu, the difference is, says the Gemara, diada my kdeira baila b'shulei, that the person knows what item they're going to be cooking in advance for Yom Tov. In other words, if I know that I'm going to be cooking on, let's take this year for a moment, Monday for Sukkot, right? When should I prepare my salt? On the same day, so that I don't have to pound it on Yom Tov itself. I should prepare it, okay? Inami b'morika. And, says the Gemara, not only that, but in particular with saffron. So saffron is another spice, okay? Also, and apparently it was a flour, that had to be, you pick the flour, you had to chop it, pound it, things like that. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, he says.
There remains a very
Kol
expensive.
haniduchim. What?
It remains a very expensive spice as well.
Yeah, okay. Kol haniduchim, anything that's pounded, nuduchim kedarkan, according to Rav Yehuda and Shmuel's name. Anything that pounded could be pounded in its normal manner. Va'afilu melach. Here, and he said this because he said it similar to the following Tana. The Tanya, who taught as follows: Amar Rabbi Meir, says Rabbi Meir, Lo nichlaku beit Shammai ubeit Hillel al haniduchin sheniduchin kedarkan. that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel did not really argue over items to be pounded, that it would be done in its normal manner. Umelech imahen, and salt was along with them. Lo nichlaku ele leducha b'fnei atzma. No, they only argued if it was going to be pounded on its own, by itself. Shebeit Shammai omrim melech b'pach uba'etz haparud litzli. That Beit Shammai, says Rabbi Meir, was such that salt had to be pounded, we said, in using a flask, okay, or with wood, a wooden pot handle, but only the amount necessary for roasting, aval l'kedera, but not for a pot. Okay, in other words, other kind of cooking, let's say a stew. Ubeit Hillel omrim b'chol davar, and Beit Hillel says it could be for anything. B'chol davar salgadatach, asks the Gemara, with anything, for anything. Ela ema lechol davar, but rather say it was for anything. That's what Beit Hillel was saying. Okay? Now, Amarle Rav Acha Bardala Lebrei. So Rav Acha is giving his son some advice. Ki diacht, when you pound, okay, let's assume it's either the salt or the spices. Atzile atzluye. Okay, put the container, let's call it the pestle, the mortar, the round thing, the mortar, okay, hold that on its side instead of just letting it lie flat. Okay, that could be right. Okay, all right. So what happens, right? And so he says that's what he's advising him. V'doch, and then you pound. Okay, Rav Sheshet Shama Kol Buchana. Okay, so what happened? Rav Sheshet tells us one time he came and he heard the pounding of a pestle. Okay, what happens? Amar, and he said, "Hi, love me govai the betaihu." That certainly can't be coming from inside of my home. Right? V'dilma atzluye d'shameh. Okay, and perhaps asks the Gemara, okay, they were holding it on its side, and that's why it had a slightly different sound. The Shammai dahavet slil kale, that he heard it had this, I'm going to say, sort of pleasant sound, a smooth sound. V'dilma hatavlin havu. So the Gemara asks, it was spices that they were pounding and not necessarily salt. Okay? Avlin, no, says the Gemara, that when they pound spices, it sounds like a dog barking. That's its sound. So the argument being that there's a difference when using different equipment, okay, and that would have a different Tanu Rabbanan, says the book. Okay, now we're told as follows. Ein osin tisnei, right? Okay, tisnei. Right? So those are groats, Groats. Okay, that's a kind of, some people used to, right? You have, I'm thinking of various cream of wheat, you have buckwheat, right? So groats is another kind of grain, okay, that could have been heated and used as a kind of breakfast porridge. The ein kochin b'machteshet. Okay, and you cannot grind them, right, these groats, with a mortar and pestle. Okay, so the Gemara asks, what? On Yontif, right, you can't, so the question is, Tarte, asks the Gemara, both, two items? Hachi ka'ama. This is what it means to tell us. Okay, matam ein osim tisnei. What's the reason that we don't prepare groats in the morning of Yom Tov for a meal? Lafisha en coach.
Because, right.
That's the case. From that, deduce from that, like Tisnei, like B'machteshet. So the Gemara answers, if one were to teach that we cannot ask Marba Matnita that was also of the, I'll call the phrase upclass Jews. Okay? As servants. The servants would always be, okay? They weren't always so. Yeah, I still have to know. Has a note of that? Okay. It was the same note that Corin has a similar note. That they were concerned that the servants might not be so stringent in bought him, okay, daisa today is cereal,
Today, Dice is right.
right? Okay, but it could have been a kind of porridge. Think of like I said, cream of wheat or what else? There was another famous, I remember some houses used to have, okay, right? Some other hot cereal, all right? Velo achal. What we tina was another one, right? Farina, right? Okay. So velo achal, and he didn't eat it. All right. V'dilma b'machteshet ktana avduha. So the Gemara says, but perhaps they had used a small mortar and pestle for it to have do it. The chazia dahavet dayek feg. Okay. Then, says the Gemara, that would have been suitable because it would have been finer. All right? V'dilma meyet mol avduha. Maybe they made it the day before. So the Gemara says, the chazia dahave kalif sahare. Why? But that was a problem because the husks seemed very bright, which seemed to imply that was fresh, exactly. Vibayatim. And if you want, I might say as follows. Shani be Mar Shmuel, that it was different in regards to Mar Shmuel's house. The Ika Pritsuta the Avde, because the servants were lazy, basically. They weren't so makpi. Okay, and that's why he didn't know whether the servants again would have pounded it with mortar and pestle. Right? Okay.
But he wasn't sure, would he still eat it?
No, so that's the point. He wasn't sure, and so he didn't eat it.
These were not his servants.
Right, but even so, he felt that,
But I'm talking about the person who had the servants. If he wasn't sure, why were they pounding it? Because he was going to eat it.
I'm not sure. Okay, let's take the example. Let's say that maybe he decided, maybe he didn't normally have that as his meal, but he had a guest, and so they were preparing something a little fancier breakfast. Okay, I mean, Zev, you come to my house for breakfast, I'm going to turn bagels, legs, and cream cheese. I'm not going to give you a plain piece of toast, right? Okay. All right.
Remember that.
Also, it's just the word dissoluteness.
The what?
Also has a tendency of doing that.
The home of Mark Shmuel is different
Because,
because of the dissoluteness of the servants.
okay, dissoluteness.
That means they just don't, they do just what they want.
They do what they want. Lazy is what Corin translated it. Okay, Pritsuta wants, I can understand that Art Scroll would use that kind of a term because they want to show it was the attitude of the servants. Okay, they did what they wanted. That kind of an attitude. Okay,
They dissed them.
all right. So, matnitin. Okay, since we're dealing already with food issues, all right, we're now going to continue with that kind of a motif. All right, in the next couple of Mishnayos. Okay, next one. Haborer kitniot b'yom tov. All right, we're here that one is selecting or separating legumes on Yom Tov. Beit Shammai Omrim, he says, borer ochel ve'ochel, that one selects or separates the foodstuffs and eat it. Ubeit Hillel Omrim, says the Mishnah, borer kidarko, that one separates it in its normal manner, becheko, either putting it in his lap, bekanon, or using in a basket, okay, or betamchui, or some sort of a plate, aval lo betavla, but not on a wooden table, velo benefech, and not, let's say, with a coarse sieve, velo bekavra, and not with a smooth sieve. All right, so no kind of Nefach also was a winnowing instrument, right? Rabban Gamliel Omer, says Rabban Gamliel, Af Madiach Visholeh, that one could also wash, okay, these kernels and skim off any refuse. Okay, so the Gemara now picks up Tanya, and we learn in a Braita, Amar Rabban Gamliel. He says it follows, B'med Varim Amorim. What are we talking about? Kesheha Ochel Murobeh al Hapsolet. When the amount of food is greater than the, let's say, leftovers, the refuse, right? Aval Psolet Meruba al Ha'ochel. But if the amount of refuse is going to be larger than the amount of foodstuffs, coal, everybody's in agreement. Notelet ha'ochel, one takes the food, umaniach et ha'psolet, and one leaves the refuse, all right? Psolet meruba al ha'ochel, and when the refuse is greater than the foodstuffs, mi ikaman deshari, is there really anyone that permits this? Lo tzricha dinafish betarcha, says the Gemara, v'zotar b'shi'ura. Okay, it was not necessary to teach this except for the situation where where it would require more effort, okay, to do that, and there would be less of an amount of real foodstuffs. So if you think of an example of, I'm going to give a simple example. Pistachio nuts, okay? We're familiar with pistachio nuts that you've got to usually open them. So you're going to have the refuse as the shell and the nut. So it's very possible that sometimes you could wind up with more refuse, more shells, because for each nut you have, in a sense, a half a shell. So you got the one nut, but you've got two pieces of shell. Okay, that's why I chose that example. So you could have certainly a situation where there would be more refuse than the food stuff. Okay.
You also have the good and the bad, you're separating.
Let's see if that's all right. I don't know if that's going to be, doesn't seem to be the issue that the Gemara is directing itself to. Okay. Rabban Gamliel Omer, Af Madiach v'Sholeh. Now, Ted, when we get to this issue, let's see if the Gemara is going to raise that point. If it's a question of good and bad, or simply how do you do it so that you can still get at the good, the food stuff, and discard, right, the refuse. All right. So what happens? Says the Gemara now. Tanya, we learn the following in a bright. Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok, he said, Kach haya min hagan shel Beit Rabban Gamliel. This was the practice in the house of Rabban Gamliel. What did they do? Shahayu mevi'in dalei malei adashim, that they would bring a pail full of lentils. Umitzifin alav mayim, and they would pour water on the lentils, right? V'nimtza ochel lamata upsolet lamala, and as a result, the lentils themselves would sink to the bottom of the Gemara said, is going to float on the top. Okay. All right. And okay, you're going to bring for the meal. All right. So that's what we're dealing with. Ein mishal, right? But Mishnah. Beit Shammai Omrim, what do they say? Ein mishalchin b'yom tov elamanot. Okay. According to Beit Shammai, we do not send on Yom Tov. We can only send, I'll phrase it that way, portions of pre-cooked foods. In other words, it's got to already be made, right? Ubeit Hillel Omrim, and Beit Hillel says, Mishalchin behema, you could send a behema, an animal, a domestic, chaya, a wild animal, va'o for a bird. In other words, you could still send the live creature to your host, so to speak, them to the slaughter in the right. Slaughter. You could send them shmanim. Tani Rabbi Yechiel, he taught as follows: Ubilvad shelo ya'asenu bishura. So long, he says, Rabbi Yechiel, that you don't have the servants or the people bringing these food gifts lined up in a row like they are a convoy. Why? Because that's going to appear too close to business. Exactly, Marty. Like you're transporting merchandise. Okay, that's what he's saying. Okay, Tana, and we have a Braita said, right? Ein shura chotami shlosha. That there's no, let's use the word here, convoy. I think that's a good example. That's how Koren translated. There's no convoy when there's less than 3 people. Mishlosha b'nei adam. So by Rav Ashi, so Rav Ashi asks and suggests, Tlata gavre, utlata mine, mine. So if you had 3 people and they were carrying 3 different kinds of foodstuffs, what would you say the answer is to that? Teku. No answer for sure. Okay. Now, Rabbi Shimon matir betzua. We said Rabbi Shimon permitted sending grain as a foodstuff. What is that the issue? Well, let's see. Tanya says a Brighton. Rabbi Shimon matir betzua kigon chitin laasot ludiot. Okay. What did he permit? Sending grain like wheat for the making of ludiot. Now, the note in Koren translated ludiot as a kind of cookie. Okay, I didn't see what the art scroll did, but I saw a further note there that said it was cooked wheat with nuts and pomegranate in it. And it was a kind of a dessert. Okay. So in other words, what? Well, no, but I'm saying, in other words, could they send baked goods? All right, because what you using wheat if you have to bake usually, right? Sa'orin, what about barley? Litain lifnei behemto, that you could send the barley in order for the host, okay, to give his animals. Adashin, lentils. Lasot mehen risisim, okay, to make some sort of crushed lentil. Okay, so what could I think of to give you an example of crushed lentils? Anybody know? Okay, Erwin, you should know this from the store, right,
Quinoa.
Erwin? What?
Maybe quinoa.
Quinoa? But you know what? You make parve chopped liver. Okay, you can use lentils to make. At least today, I know, right? It's like a pea, like yeah, it's like in the pea family, right? So it could be another way of making that kind of an example too. Okay,
To make lentil groats.
lentil groats.
Groats?
Well, that's probably what they ate more there. They probably didn't think of parve chopped liver then. Okay, matnitin, a new Mishnah. Mishalchin kelim, bein tfurin, bein she'en tfurin. What else might you send? Okay, you can send garments, clothing, says the Mishnah, whether they are sewn or whether they haven't been sewn. The afapi sheyesh behen klayim, and even though these garments may be subject to the law of kalayim, right? Shanis, vehein letzorech hamoed, and they need to be, however, for the purpose of the holiday, right? Aval, lo sandal hamisumar, you cannot send a spiked sandal, right? That was forbidden to be worn by the rabbis on Yom Tov, or Shabbat for that matter. Velo min al sheino tafur, and also not a sandal, a kind of shoe that was not completely sewn.
I thought that they had to send something that would be used on Yom Tov.
Right.
And if this was not sewn, if it wasn't prepared yet, how would they use it?
That's right. So they can't use it. That's why you don't send it.
Also, they don't send it.
Right. You don't send it. In other words, it couldn't be worn, okay, on Yom Tov or Shabbat.
But the
Right.
Mishnah says we may send it.
No, it says, avalo sendal hamisumar.
That's this.
Right. Velo min al she'ino tafur.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the garments.
Oh, the garments?
Well, either
Yes,
sewn-
it
sewn
has
or
to
not.
be for the holiday. L'tzorech hamoed.
So you can wear it on sharpness, you can wear it.
No.
Oh, we'll
Oh.
see. Let's see. Okay, we'll see what it says. Oh, get a little bit more in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af lo min al lavan, and not even a white shoe, right? Mipnei shetzarich oman. Why? Because you would need a craftsman to take the white shoe and actually paint it. Okay, in other words, finish it to be able to be worn. Zeh haklal, this is the point. Kol shene'otehen bo biyom tov. Here's your point, Zev, right?
Yeah.
Anything that one can really benefit from on Yom Tov, mishalchin oto, one can send it to another person. Gemara, bishlemet furin, right? That's acceptable when we're talking about garments that are sewn. Why? Chazul malbush, okay? That they're worthy of being worn. She'ain furin, but the fact that they're not sewn, nami chazu lekisui. Why? Because one can use them for covering. In other words, you might use them to put down on a bench. You might use them to throw over yourself like a scarf. Okay, a shawl, for example, a woman might use it. Eliklayim lemai chazu. Here's your point, right? But if it's shatnez, if it's klayim, for what is it suitable? V'chitema chazu l'meimach tute. If you say that it's suitable to place under oneself, in other words, to put it like a seat, all right, on a cushion or something like that. Vahatanya, aren't we taught elsewhere a brighter that says, lo ya'aleh alayach, that it should not be on top of you? In other words, you can't, excuse me, have it even on your person,
Well, because you can't have an off from it, no?
right?
No, I
Of-
don't think it's, I know, they're afraid it's gonna wrap around you.
Right, we're gonna see that in just a second.
Can warm the body.
Aval ata yechol lahatzio tachtecha, but you could put it underneath you. Aval amru chachamim. But again, the sages say, asur la'asod kain, shema tichroch lo nima al basaro. You shouldn't even put it underneath you, because who's to say even like a thread of it is going to wind up being on top of your body. Okay? So what happens? Chitema the mafsik mide bene bene. And if you're going to say, well, maybe you can put something else there, an object, so it's going to be between you and that kalayim item. Let's say it's I don't know, whatever, a piece of cloth, and then you put something on top, and then you sit on it, right? What about that? Va'amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. Didn't Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi say as follows? Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Amar Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul. Amar Rabbi. Okay. Mishum Kihila Kedisha de Yerushalayim. So you see the whole Masorah here. Afilu Eser Matzaot. Even if there were 10 mattresses. Zo agabe zo, one on top of the other. Uklayim tachtehen, and the bottom one, right? Okay, had kalayim, asurli shein alehem. It is forbidden to sleep on them. Right? Reminds you of the story of what? The Princess and the Pea. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Mishum shene'amar lo ya'ale alechem. Because it says you shouldn't have it on top. Ela bevilon. No, what we're talking about is you're sending this cloth of kalayim to use as a curtain, okay, for some reason. V'ha'amar ula, but didn't Ula say, mipnei ma amru vilon tameh? Why did they say, says Ula, that such a curtain is not appropriate as tameh? Mipnei shehashemesh mitchamem kenegdo. Shehashamash, that the servant might use that curtain to warm himself. Okay, but let's go on a little bit. Ela bekishin, but we're talking about material that is hard material, not soft cloth. V'chihad amar Rav Huna, b'rei de Rav Yoshua. And what about that which was said by Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua? Hai nimta gamda. Let's say you have a piece of hard felt material, right? The nerish that comes from nerish, sharia, that would be permitted. Okay? And then tomorrow we'll pick up a little bit more where it says Rav Papa Ardalin Ein Bahen Mishum Klein. Okay? When it talks about some of the other items. All right? Okay, everybody. Stay well. Take care.
All the best. Thank you, Reb.
I think perhaps it was just not the focus of that item. If they were focusing on right away what could be sent, okay, you've already said in the Mishnah that it has to be for the purpose of the holiday directly. So that is the essential element right there. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.